Good afternoon. Welcome to Intelligent Talk with Ralph McElvenney. Join us every Thursday at 5 p.m. on the City World Radio Network as we discuss topics in politics, art, and current events.
Welcome to Intelligent Talk. Our website is intelligenttalk.com. We're very pleased today to have Susan Wood on. Susan Wood was the longtime assistant through most of the 1970s of the legendary British actor Peter Sellers. The word genius is overused today, but it does, I think, apply to Sellers. He died at the age of 54 in 1980, mostly famous for the role of Inspector Clouseau, but he could play virtually any accent, played many roles, worked in many different types of films. So, Susan, thank you so much for coming on the program today.
My pleasure.
Could you please tell me when you first started working for Peter Sellers? Was it 1973?
It was, honestly, I think it was 72 or 73. I know I should remember, but I really don't precisely. Yes, my ex-husband had just met Peter. He had directed him in a charity show in London, and Peter was bemoaning the fact that he had lost his longtime secretary, who I now, of course, know was the wonderful Hattie Proudfoot, and he was having lots of problems filling that position. And my ex, always having an eye to the main chance and liking the idea of being close to Peter, suggested that I might be able to help him. So the next day I went to his news house and was absolutely amazed to find Liza Minnelli in the kitchen. And we chatted for about 3 minutes, I think, and Peter's only question was, "Can you start tomorrow?" And I did. And that was the beginning of a really fascinating few years of my life.
I know you mentioned, I read that his career at that time was not in a strong position. Was that why he was having trouble?
It was dreadful.
Was that why he was having trouble hiring people, or?
I don't think he was having trouble hiring people. I think people would have wanted to work for him. It's just that he was in the depths of despair, and I didn't know that at the time, of course, when I started, but I learned very quickly. And that's incredibly difficult to work with someone like Peter, who you expect to be this happy, cheerful, charming, delightful man, and he isn't. He is morose. He's locked in his room. He's refusing to come out, and those first couple of years were pretty much like that, up and down. I mean, he was working. I'm trying to remember. I think when I started with him, he was either doing The Optimists of Nine Elms or Hard Beds and Soft Battles with the Boltings, one of those. So he was working, but he hated what he was doing.
Now,
and that made him incredibly depressed.
Right. Now, I know we had two different residences. As I told you, I'd gone to the Dorchester Hotel, even to deal with the barber there, Ken, who's still around, and remember when Peter Sellers was there, and he had a house in Stade, Switzerland. Did you work in either of those locations, or did you work?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I worked. He when I first started with him, he had a house in Eton Mews, and then I don't know whether the lease ran out or it was too expensive. I mean, I wasn't close enough to him then to know all of those details. But then we moved to another house in London, and then when the things started to pick up about that time, and then he bought the chalet in Gstaad, and I worked from there with him on many occasions. And he then, when he married Lynn later on, in between times, when he was working, we were coming backwards and forwards to Los Angeles, and he was renting houses in Beverly Hills. But then after that, when things got successful, as I say, he bought the chalet, and then also he bought a house for Lynn in Hollywood Hills, Robin Drive. So I worked from all those places. Oh, and of course in Port Grimaud. Sorry, I missed out the very important time in France when he had to go to France for tax reasons, and he bought a house in Port Grimaud, and we worked from there too.
A house in where? Sorry, the last place, Cork?
Port Grimaud.
Oh, Port Grimaud.
I'm not. Yeah. Sorry, it's probably my pronunciation, which is poor.
No.
But in the south of France.
And what could you just tell me what an average day was like working for Peter Sellers? I mean, were you dealing with his finances? Were you scheduling his mystics, his psycho?
Forgive me for laughing, but there was no average day. But yes, I mean, of course, dealing with fan mail was one of the things that I did. but mainly it was dealing with Peter's life. It's really hard to explain because honestly, every day brought something different. He'd either just make arrangements to go out to lunch. If he was working, it was different because obviously we would be. Sometimes I would stay at the house where he went on the set, and then sometimes I would go with him. I mean, particularly the last years, and especially that last movie, The Fiendish Plot of Dr. Fu Manchu, which he made in Paris, and I was there while they were filming most of that one. But the others I went backwards and forwards. And he would want things when he was on location. I mean, he was always sending me back to England to pick up stuff like patent medicines because he didn't believe that what he could buy locally was as good as what I could bring in from England. So there was a lot of moving around. Sometimes it was just a question of keeping him company. He would be between wives or girlfriends and just going to lunch or something. And he would do that. And obviously, of course, myself and the mighty Bert Mortimer, who I'm sure you must have heard of, was his wonderful driver and minder and much more than that. But,
kind of fired him, right? I remember.
Yes, that was the most awful thing that happened. That was one of Peter's crazier moments. We're still to this day not 100% sure what actually happened, but he called me one evening. We were in the south of France, and he called me down and said he wanted to dictate this letter, and the letter was really firing Bert, and I couldn't believe it. So I held on to the letter for as long as I could, because often with Peter, and again, I'm sure you know something about the letters he used to write to his children.
I do.
Disinheriting them. And I would hold on to those for the longest time. And with the children, I could call them and tell them, look out, eventually, I'm going to have to mail this, so be prepared. And I really didn't even want to tell Bert about the letter or prepare him because I kept I couldn't believe it. I mean, he'd been with Peter years and years, and they were so close. Anyway, in the end, I had to deliver it, and the rest was history. Then Bert did go on to work for Max Bygraves, who was living in the same building in London where Peter had an apartment at that time in Roebuck House.
Did he ever discuss his private life with you? I read the book P.S. I Love You by his son, who unfortunately also died at the same age as Peter Sellers, also of a heart ailment at age 54. I know he had. I know you're referring to letters to his children. One letter he wrote to his son saying, basically, I renounce you, change your name. And then near the end of his life, he brought him to his house in Stad and wanted to help him a little bit when he had his divorce with his wife. But did you have any idea why that was such a strain? Did the children ask for money? Was there anything that could have strained it that you saw from your perspective?
No, honestly, I again, it's one of those mysteries of Peter. I don't know what it was about. No, the children were great. I mean, I said, to my knowledge, they certainly didn't ask for anything. I think they would have liked more of his time and more of his love and attention. But to the best of my knowledge, nobody asked for anything extraordinary. It was just Peter wanting everybody in his life to make him the center of their world. And, of course, as the children were growing up, and this is just, I have no idea if this is right or wrong, it's just my impression. As they grew up and started to have their own lives, he wasn't their be-all and end-all, and they didn't do every single thing he wanted them to do. I mean, stupid things like Victoria coming onto the set wearing purple, and, he had an absolute fit because he had a thing about the colour purple and the colour green. Stupid things, and obviously it put a wedge between them, and then I think he was confused that they didn't want to be with him all the time. Well, you wouldn't want to be if he was constantly going into strange moods and yelling at you.
That's interesting, your perspective on that. I know he wanted his son to go into acting, if I recall, and his son did not go into the film industry. He became like a tradesman in the building.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that is real. I mean, Michael got very involved with music as well, which Peter did like a lot. So it wasn't all bad. And again, I wasn't party to any of those types of conversations, where Peter wanted to push Michael in a certain direction. I wasn't aware of that.
Did you see him Britt Eklund, who was was a Bond girl and played in the movie The Man with the Golden Gun, for those who don't remember Britt Eklund, but she doesn't say particularly nice things about him. And did you see any interaction with Britt Eklund or his last wife, Lynn Frederick, and how they got along?
No, my only interactions with Britt were when I would go and pick up Victoria, because she was a little girl then, and I'd pick her up sometimes to take her to her father. Britt was always very charming to me, and we didn't discuss Peter. So, I've never had a conversation with her about him. I know that their divorce was ugly. That's all I do know.
One of the things when we spoke a few days ago, you mentioned that some of the kindness he showed to you, like, for example, arranging tickets to go to Disneyland in California. Could you just talk about that and some of his really nice side and how he showed that to you?
Yes, absolutely. He could be so kind. We were working on, I think it must have been one of the Panthers, but we were in California. My daughter, who was 8, was in boarding school, and it was her birthday coming up, or the holidays, and I couldn't go back. He didn't want me to go back. So what he did instead was he arranged for her to fly first class to Beverly Hills and stay with us. I mean, she had the most wonderful time. And then for a surprise, one morning, a great white stretch limo turned up and took us all, including him and Lynn, which I thought was lovely. They came with us to Disneyland, and of course he'd arranged ahead of time. So my daughter, for her very first experience of Disneyland, was to be taken on a kind of first-class tour, going to the head of the line of every ride there was, and eating in this very elegant restaurant there. So she has never forgotten it. I mean, she's 50 years old now, and we still talk about it. So those sorts of things. He was very kind. And another occasion when my uncle had died, I was very close to him, and I couldn't get back to the funeral. And I was feeling very down, and Peter was going off to lunch with David Niven, and he just said, "Come with me. It'll be exciting. It'll cheer you up." And it was just little things like that. And to his friends, he was incredibly generous. If you were in, you were in all the way. But he could just drop you overnight too, for no particular reason.
Who were his key friends? I read that Princess Margaret, the Queen's sister, was a friend of his. You mentioned David Niven. I mean, I know he saw Jack Nicholson for dinner and Warren Beatty, but who were his closest friends, would you say?
I suppose Dave Lodge, Spike to a degree, but again, they had a very fascinating up and down friendship.
Spike Milligan, right? The Goonies.
Yeah, Spike Milligan. He was very close to Lord Snowden. I would say they were very close friends.
Lord Snowden was Princess Margaret's husband, the famous photographer.
Yeah, Princess Margaret's ex-husband. He was married to somebody else, and yeah. They were close. And, a handful of people that really, some of whom I met and some of whom I didn't. But it was difficult to be close to him because you didn't know what day of the week you were going to be his friend, what day of the week you weren't. I don't think, and that sounds so odd, but I honestly don't think he was aware of what he was doing by sort of not taking people's calls. He would go through stages of, I know, I don't want to speak to him. And of course, the person at the other end who perhaps had dinner with him every night of the week, the month before, was stunned and amazed. But then he would, he'd get over it, whatever it was, whatever slight he thought that had happened.
Did he ever make you laugh? Did he ever break into accents? And I know he was an amazing mimic.
Yeah.
Many times. So he could be funny then off camera then.
Oh, he could. When he was in a great mood, there was nobody more fun to be with. Absolutely not. I mean, he would do that stupid thing as we get into the elevator, and he'd say things to me. It'd be a crowded elevator, and he would say things like, "Do you think he's safely locked up? You did lock, didn't you? You did lock the suite. You sure he can't get out?" I mean, and stupid things like that, which were absolutely idiotic. But yes, he could, and also he would practice, his walk for whatever role he was going to take on. He would practice his walk and his talk, and that could be great fun as well.
A lot has been written about his reliance upon psychics and mystics and mediums, and you're in a better position to know than most, but I read that someone bribed him with the words B.E. that said that was important, and they wanted him, I guess he was on, his agent had done that, they wanted him to work with Blake Edwards and start the Pink Panther films again. But as far as his reliance on, I mean, how reliant was he on mediums and those things, in your opinion? Was it a very strong, very?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He was very, very reliant on them. And he also, he had a little shrine in his apartment in London, where he had everything from a sort of Joan the Wad to the Jewish thing. And I mean, sorry, I can't.
Menorah?
I'm being inarticulate. But he had just everything. He had everything in that corner. It was like hedging his bets. So he was superstitious, both religiously, and then on the other extreme, he relied on all of these people to tell him what to do. I mean, he was very involved with the famous psychic, but that was before my time. I only heard about it from Bert afterwards.
And were you the one who paid his bills for these psychics? And that raises another question of, I read that he was not particularly good with money. I mean, did you see a lot of money outflowing to charlatans and people like that?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't. Bert was more in charge of that than I was. He would sort of go off and pay them in cash and things. But yeah, Peter, I think, did spend a lot of money. I think he was taken for a ride by a lot of people that he sincerely believed in.
Yeah, I mean, do you think he was just searching for love, or someone he could, like, reliance on someone?
I think a lot of it had to do with his mother, who he was very close to, and who had died long before I joined him. And he was always waiting for her. He was convinced that she was in touch with him a lot of the time. I mean, he would read into certain things. I don't know, if we saw a bird sitting on a post or something, he would think it was Peg, come back to talk to him. So he was very easily persuaded by these people, that, yes, his mother had come back to talk to him. I think that was a big part of it. I think he was also searching for some sort of peace. He was never really at peace with himself. And I don't know, but I think a lot of comedians seem to suffer from that same.
Yes, absolutely. I just wanted to ask a little bit about his health. He had his first heart attack in '64, and then a series of heart attacks after that, of course, culminating in 1980. But do you think he understood he was on borrowed time, and that had some effect upon him? Because he almost died in '64.
No. I don't think he thought about it like that. I think he really thought he would live forever.
Really? Okay.
I think, yeah. He didn't take any special precautions with his health at all. I mean, he was either dieting or eating too much. He was not drinking or drinking. I mean, he was. It was interesting in that way.
I had read that in 1976 he went to see Dr. Christian Bernard perform an open heart or a transplant, and he was considering having that on himself, but seeing the operation terrified him, and then he decided not to go through with it. Is that your understanding?
Yes, yeah. He didn't put it quite like that, but yes, that was exactly what happened. He flew out and saw the operation, came back, and the date was set and everything for him to go back, and then he didn't at the last minute. And then but he tried other things which were fascinating. I mean, he didn't do that, but he did go to the Philippines and have one of those strange, I'm trying to think what they call it.
Like a healer or something? Like a healer?
Surgeon with the rusty knife. Sorry?
Oh, I was thinking like a spiritual healer, but he went to an actual doctor in the Philippines?
Well, they call themselves doctors. Do you remember, it was for a period of time they would appear to perform an operation and pull things out of your body.
Okay. Wow, that's obviously that didn't have any effect, I guess, right? Or that whatever.
No, I mean no, of course not. But he did that, and then, as you know, then the day after his final heart attack he was supposed to be flying out to America to have heart surgery
at UCLA, right?
I believe so. I honestly don't remember the details now.
My favorite films, and I told you this as a child, I'd hurt myself in the 70s. My mother took me to a Pink Panther film. It just cheered me right up. And I wanted to ask about, I'd heard different things about what he thought as Pink Panther. Some of them, he sort of denigrated the characters. Other times, he said nice things about it. And so I wanted to ask, what was his opinion of the Clouseau character, and what was his opinion of Blake Edwards?
Gosh, I think for a lot of time he and Blake got on extremely well, but Peter was not easy on set, and I think Blake was a professional, and he expected his stars to turn up on time and behave the way they're supposed to, and often Peter wouldn't. If he felt that the film wasn't going the way he wanted it to, then it was nothing for him to stay in his trailer for 3 hours at a time, or just not turn up, or go home because he felt sick. So I think that obviously colored their relationship. I would say, if you didn't have those things going on, I would say they were great friends. But it did, of course, impact that relationship.
I understand that it was he that bought the trench coat for the role of Inspector Clouseau and sort of invented that character. And it's funny because great comics like Steve Martin just could not do what Blake Edwards could do, which essentially is be funny while appearing to be serious. It's such a hard thing to do, and Robert Benigni couldn't do that. So he was a unique person. And Dr. Strangelove, he played 7 different roles and different accents, or 3 roles, whatever it was. I mean, just the way he could perform was just quite something. But did he ever mention the roles to you, whether he liked the character or not? Did he ever discuss that with you, or make fun of it, or praise it?
No, not really. No, with Clouseau, no, it was, and I think especially after the first couple, it was very much a job. He did it because he needed to. It paid him a great deal of money. And I think occasionally he got a lot of pleasure out of doing it, especially when he was working with his friends. Because, as I say, he would have people like Eric Sykes and Spike Milligan and Dave Lodge on set with him, and they would all have parts. And he loved that part of it and would have a lot of fun. But otherwise, no, he didn't really express to me any sort of particular feeling one way or the other.
Okay, I just want to focus on sort of 1980, that with a sad time when he dies. But first, I just want to ask you, I mean, you may not want to comment on this, but as you know, in his will, supposedly people say he was going to change his will back from his third wife and give his children more money. But as it was, he died. Essentially, it all went to Lynn Frederick, that she died, I think, of a drug overdose or something. And then her daughter now has all the money. And it's not very much. It's something like $3 or $4 million. It wasn't a huge amount of money. I guess he wasn't that great with his funds. But did you know anything about the will, why he would disinherit his children, and whether he was planning to change it back?
I do know something. I honestly believe that's something that I should just leave for the family to discuss. It's a difficult one. I'm so sorry, but it really is not something I'd like to answer.
No, I understand. I mean, I understand he left his children something like 800 pounds, which was the minimum amount you could leave under British law, not have them contest the will.
Right.
So just to get to the last day of his life, it's 1980. You're at the Dorchester Hotel. You were with one other person with Peter Sellers, right? There was another person there?
Yes, Michael Jeffries, his dresser. And
could you describe what happened, please?
Yes, what happened was we were having lunch, Michael, Peter, and I. He was that night going to do Goon Show reunion, and then the next day, as I say, he was scheduled to fly out to America for his heart surgery. And he was in a slightly odd mood. He didn't. Michael went into the bedroom to get all his clothes ready for the evening, and then Peter and I sat talking, and he really didn't want me to go, and I had a lot of things he'd asked me to do, and I kept saying, I really have to go. And he was like, no, just stay a bit longer. And then towards the end, I was packing everything up to leave, and he said to me, can you get me some water? And I went over to get some water, and I heard this great thump, and I turned around, and he'd fallen to the floor and was rapidly turning that dreadful colour when people have a major heart attack. So I was screaming to Michael to come in, and I was on the phone then calling for an ambulance. And I must say, everybody moved extremely quickly. It's like a blur to me, and then I realized it was just people moving very fast. And they got him into the ambulance and took him, and we followed him. His driver at that time was a man called Peter Greenwood, and he'd been waiting downstairs to take me shopping and things. So we got into the car, and by the time we got to the hospital, it was extraordinary. I don't know how the news had got out, but by the time we got there, there was press everywhere. And I remember getting out of the car and getting knocked down to the ground in this rush of people trying to get to the hospital to find out what was going on with him. And then we got to the hospital, and they gave us a private room to start calling. So I started calling people and the children, and wives and ex-wives, it was clear that if Peter was going to get through this, it was a miracle. And as you know, sadly, he didn't. But the saddest thing of all is that we were all there for, I believe, I can't remember now. It's just such a blur. But I think it was like almost 3 days. And we were all at the hospital all the time. Because Peter was a man who never, ever wanted to be alone. And anyway, by the end of I think it was about the second or third night, the hospital said to us, look, nothing's going to happen. Why don't you all go and get some sleep? And of course we did. And then 2 hours later they called us to say he'd gone. And so it always breaks my heart that he passed with nobody with him. That man who wanted to be surrounded all the time and needed people desperately was alone. And I think that's the saddest thing.
In looking at his life, and you started with him when he was, of course, a well-known actor, but then he became wealthy and very successful with the Pink Panther films, and you saw him the last years of his life. Do you think he got any kind of happiness with the achievements that he was able to do in terms of the success, or was he any different in 1980 than he was in 73, or was it pretty much the same Peter, just with more cash or more assets?
Pretty much the same man. I didn't. I'm listening to myself. I make it sound like it was miserable all the time. Far from that. But no, he was never content, and he was never totally pleased with anything that he had done. No matter how good it was, no matter how much people told him it was brilliant, he could always see the flaws.
Did he get any pleasure from anything, like in terms of watching other people's movies or reading books or travel, or did anything that you come to mind give him pleasure where it took his mind off his torments for a few hours?
He loved going away places and having vacations and things, and then he'd remember that he brought himself along, and he would go back to being Peter. So, no, I think he had moments of happiness, as we all do, but overall, no, he was not a happy man.
Well, that's sad because he brought so much happiness to everyone else. Well, Susan Wood, thank you so much for coming on the program, Intelligent Talk, and sharing your memories of the legendary actor Peter Sellers. I very much appreciate your time, and thank you for granting what I believe is your first radio interview.
Yes, it is, and thank you. Oh, excuse me. Thank you for making it so easy, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much. Good day. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.